Silence is often mistaken for the end of a relationship, a final period that closes the book on what once was. But psychology tells a very different story, a story that is far more nuanced and complex than the simple narratives we tell ourselves. The most powerful emotional shifts rarely happen during arguments, emotional conversations, or dramatic breakups that are filled with tears and accusations. They begin when nothing is said at all, in the quiet spaces between words, in the pauses that stretch into hours and then into days. Everyone talks about what happens when an empath decides to disappear, when they finally reach their limit and withdraw their presence. Others focus on what an avoidant feels after walking away, on the relief or regret that follows their departure. Yet, one question is almost always left unanswered, a question that lies at the heart of so many relationship struggles. What happens when both of them stop reaching out at exactly the same time, when the silence is mutual rather than one-sided? This is where the story becomes far more complex than most people realize, far more layered than the simple explanations that are often offered. From the outside, it looks simple, a clean break that can be easily understood. No messages, no calls, no attempts to reconnect, just silence, an empty space where communication once lived. But beneath that silence, two completely different emotional journeys begin unfolding, journeys that take them in opposite directions. One person may feel lighter, believing distance has finally brought peace, that the constant pressure of the relationship has been lifted. The other may feel overwhelmed, searching for answers that never come, their mind spinning with unspoken questions. As the days pass, those emotional experiences slowly begin to change, transforming in ways that neither person could have predicted at the outset. The one who felt relief may start feeling the weight of absence, may begin to sense the void that was once filled by the other person. The person who seemed broken may slowly begin rebuilding their inner world, finding strength they did not know they possessed. That reversal surprises many people, because emotional timing is not the same for everyone, because our hearts do not heal on the same schedule. An avoidant and an empath process loss in completely different ways. And understanding those differences explains why no contact can lead to outcomes that appear confusing or even contradictory, outcomes that defy the simple stories we tell ourselves. Throughout this video, you will discover what usually happens during the first few days of silence, the initial shock that sets the stage for everything that follows. You will learn why relief and heartbreak often arrive in opposite order, why one person feels lighter while the other feels heavier. You will understand how the weeks that follow quietly reshape both personalities, transforming them in ways that are often invisible to the outside world. You will explore why many avoidants do not fully experience their emotions until much later, why their grief is delayed rather than absent. You will also learn why empaths often begin healing long before they realize it, why their pain is not a sign of weakness, but a path to strength. You will discover why silence is not always a sign that someone has stopped caring, why distance can sometimes be a form of love. And you will see why the emotional distance between two people can sometimes reveal feelings that constant communication keeps hidden, feelings that words can obscure. Most importantly, we will separate popular myths from psychological reality, showing why no contact is not simply a relationship strategy, but a process that exposes the deepest attachment patterns within both people, patterns that have been shaped by years of experience. By the end of this video, you will understand why two people can experience the exact same silence while living through completely different emotional realities, why the same absence can mean different things to different hearts. And you will understand why the outcome depends less on who reaches out first and more on who grows during the silence, who uses the space to become more whole. The final part of this journey reveals the hidden turning point that many people never see coming, a moment that changes everything. And it may completely change the way you think about avoidance, empaths, and emotional healing, offering a new perspective on these familiar dynamics. If you are looking for deeper psychological insights that go beyond common relationship advice, you are in the right place. Welcome to the channel. If you enjoy thoughtful videos that explore human behavior, attachment, and emotional growth, make sure to subscribe and join us for more journeys into the hidden side of the mind. The first mistake most people make is believing that silence means the same thing to everyone, that the absence of words carries the same weight for every heart. It does not. And this misunderstanding is at the root of so much confusion. Two people can stop speaking on the very same day, yet experience completely different emotional realities, realities that are shaped by their unique psychological histories. This difference becomes even greater when one person has an avoidant attachment style and the other naturally leans toward empathy, when their fundamental ways of relating to the world are so different. On the surface, both are choosing no contact, a mutual decision that appears to be the same. Both stop sending messages, both stop calling, both disappear from each other's daily lives, creating a void where connection once existed. But beneath that quiet surface, their minds are moving in opposite directions, each traveling a path that the other cannot fully understand. That is because each person is trying to protect themselves in the only way they have learned, in the only way that feels safe. The empath seeks emotional connection because connection feels like safety, because closeness brings comfort and reassurance. Being close to someone brings comfort, reassurance, and stability, a sense of being held and understood. Even after conflict, the empath often believes that honest conversation can repair the damage, that words can heal what has been broken. Speaking about feelings is not simply a habit for them, not just a preference. It is how they make sense of emotional pain, how they process the chaos of their inner world. They want to understand what happened, why it happened, and whether the relationship can be healed, whether there is still hope. Distance rarely feels comforting, rarely brings the peace they seek. Instead, silence often feels like uncertainty, and uncertainty creates anxiety, a gnawing unease that will not be ignored. The avoidant experience is almost the reverse, a completely different response to the same situation. Emotional closeness can become overwhelming when stress is high, when the demands of intimacy become too much to bear. Instead of finding comfort in long conversations, they often feel trapped by emotional expectations, by the weight of what is being asked of them. Their nervous system reacts differently, responding to closeness with a desire for distance. Distance creates relief, a sense of safety that closeness cannot provide. Space feels like control, a way to manage the intensity of their feelings. Silence feels like a chance to breathe again, to find their footing in a world that has become too demanding. This does not always mean they care less, does not mean their feelings are shallow or insincere. It often means they regulate emotional pressure in a completely different way, a way that is rooted in their early experiences. While the empath moves toward connection, the avoidant moves away from it, each seeking the same thing but in opposite directions. Both are trying to feel safe, to find a sense of security in an uncertain world. They simply travel in opposite directions, each believing their path is the right one. This creates one of the greatest psychological ironies in relationships, a paradox that is both heartbreaking and fascinating. Both people believe silence is protecting them, shielding them from further pain, but for entirely different reasons, reasons that are invisible to the other person. The empath may stop reaching out because they feel exhausted, because they have given everything they have and received too little in return. They have tried explaining themselves, asking questions, expressing love, and seeking reassurance, only to be met with walls. After enough disappointment, they finally decide to remain silent, hoping to protect what is left of their heart, to preserve the pieces that remain. Deep inside, they may still wish the other person would notice their absence, would reach out and bridge the gap. Their silence is painful because it goes against their natural instinct to reconnect, because every fiber of their being wants to reach out. The avoidant, however, often experiences silence as protection from emotional overload, as a shield against the intensity they cannot manage. They believe that stepping back will reduce tension, calm their thoughts, and prevent further conflict, that distance is the answer. In their mind, silence creates emotional breathing room, a space where they can think clearly. Both believe they are making the healthiest choice available, yet neither fully understands what silence means to the other person, what it signifies in the language of their heart. This misunderstanding becomes the invisible wall separating them, a barrier that cannot be seen but can be felt. The moment both stop contacting each other, their emotional timelines begin moving at different speeds, no longer synchronized. They are no longer walking through the same emotional experience together, no longer sharing the same journey. They have entered separate psychological journeys, each facing their own fears and hopes. This is why people watching from the outside often become confused, why they cannot understand the different reactions. One person appears calm while the other seems heartbroken, one composed while the other is in pieces. One appears unaffected while the other cannot stop thinking about the relationship, their mind consumed by memories. It creates the illusion that one cared more than the other, that the love was unequal. In reality, emotional timing is rarely equal, rarely aligned. Human beings do not process loss on the same schedule, especially when their attachment patterns are different, when their histories have shaped them so differently. During the first few days of no contact, the avoidant often experiences something that surprises many people, something that seems to contradict everything they have been told about love and loss. Relief arrives before sadness, a welcome release from the pressure that once felt overwhelming. The constant emotional pressure disappears. The weight that was pressing down on them finally lifted. There are no difficult conversations waiting on the phone, no messages that demand a response. There are no emotional questions demanding answers, no queries that probe too deeply. There is no fear of disappointing someone today, no anxiety about saying the wrong thing. Their nervous system begins calming down because the source of emotional intensity feels distant, because the storm has finally passed. Daily routines become easier to focus on, the small tasks of life regaining their importance. Work becomes a welcome distraction, a way to fill the hours. Personal hobbies suddenly feel enjoyable again, activities that had lost their appeal. There is a sense of freedom that can feel completely genuine, a lightness that is intoxicating. This early relief is not necessarily proof that they never cared, not evidence of a shallow heart. It is usually a sign that emotional pressure has temporarily disappeared, that the weight has been lifted. Their mind interprets distance as safety, as a refuge from the demands of intimacy. The relationship no longer feels like an immediate emotional challenge that requires action, a problem that must be solved. Because of this relief, many avoidants believe the situation has solved itself, that the distance has resolved the conflict. They convince themselves that time will naturally reduce the intensity of everything, that feelings will fade without effort. The conflict is no longer happening in front of them, no longer demanding their attention. The uncomfortable emotions seem quieter, less urgent. They may even think that staying silent is helping both people recover, that the space is a gift. This belief feels reasonable from their perspective because their emotional system responds positively to space, because distance feels like safety. They mistake temporary calm for permanent healing, a common error that leads to later regret. At this stage, they rarely spend hours analyzing every conversation or searching for hidden meanings, rarely dwell on what might have been. Instead, they focus on returning to normal life as quickly as possible, on restoring the equilibrium that was disturbed. The empath experiences those same first days in a completely different way, a way that is marked by pain rather than relief. Instead of relief, there is often shock, a sudden and disorienting jolt. The sudden absence feels heavy, a weight that presses down on their chest. Daily routines become filled with reminders of the relationship, reminders that are everywhere. Small moments that once felt ordinary now carry emotional weight, freighted with memory. A favorite song, a familiar place, or even a quiet evening can trigger memories that arrive without warning, flooding the mind with feelings. Their mind naturally begins searching for explanations, seeking to make sense of what has happened. They replay conversations again and again, examining every word. They examine every disagreement, looking for the turning point. They remember every word, every silence, every expression, each one potentially significant. Questions appear one after another, a relentless stream. Did they say the wrong thing? Could they have handled the conflict differently? Was there a moment everything changed without them noticing? Their brain is not trying to create suffering, is not trying to hurt them. It is trying to restore emotional understanding, to make sense of the chaos. Finding meaning feels necessary because meaning creates emotional closure, because understanding brings peace. This is one reason empaths struggle so deeply during the beginning of no contact, why the silence is so painful. Their emotional world is built around understanding people, around making sense of feelings. When answers disappear, their imagination starts filling the empty spaces, creating narratives that may not be true. They may assume the worst because uncertainty feels more painful than truth, because not knowing is harder than knowing the worst. The absence of communication becomes its own message, even when no message was actually intended, even when the silence is not meant to convey anything. Every silent day seems to confirm fears that may not even be real, fears that are rooted in anxiety rather than reality. While the avoidant is trying not to think too deeply, trying to avoid the intensity, the empath finds it almost impossible to stop thinking, their mind endlessly churning. This difference creates the first major psychological imbalance between them, a gap that widens with each passing day. One person is moving away from emotional intensity, seeking relief in distance. The other is moving directly into it, feeling every moment of the silence. The empath's emotions become louder because silence removes the opportunity to clarify misunderstandings, because unanswered questions grow in the dark. The avoidance emotions become quieter because silence removes immediate pressure, because the demands have stopped. Neither person is pretending. Neither is necessarily acting with bad intentions. Neither is trying to hurt the other. Their nervous systems are simply responding according to patterns developed over many years, patterns that have shaped their entire lives. As more days pass, these opposite coping styles quietly push them even farther apart, creating a chasm that seems impossible to bridge. The empath processes pain by turning inward, by looking into the depths of their own heart. They think, they reflect, they journal, they speak with trusted friends, they search for books, videos, or advice that might explain what happened, that might bring clarity. They are willing to sit with painful emotions because they believe understanding those emotions will eventually help them heal, because they trust the process. Feeling becomes part of recovery, a necessary step on the path to wholeness. Tears, conversations, and self-reflection are not signs of weakness for the empath, not evidence of failure. They are part of the natural healing process, a way of metabolizing pain. The avoidant often follows a very different path, a path that avoids the pain rather than facing it. Instead of sitting with uncomfortable emotions, they fill their schedule, packing every moment with activity. They work longer hours, immersing themselves in their career. They focus on responsibilities, on the demands of daily life. They exercise, finding relief in physical exertion. They spend time on practical tasks that demand attention, that distract the mind. They convince themselves there are more important things to think about, more urgent matters to address. Emotional compartmentalization becomes their strongest defense, a way of containing their feelings. Pain is placed into a box and pushed aside for later, for a time when they are ready to face it. Sometimes that later becomes weeks or even months away, sometimes years. This strategy works surprisingly well in the beginning, because it creates the feeling that everything is under control, that they are handling things well. Yet, emotions rarely disappear, simply because they are ignored, because they are pushed aside. They often wait quietly beneath the surface until the mind finally slows down enough to notice them, until the distractions fade. While each person is coping in their own way, another misunderstanding quietly grows, another layer of confusion. The empath begins believing the avoidant has already moved on, has already forgotten about them. From their perspective, the silence feels too complete to mean anything else, too absolute. They see no messages, no emotional reactions, no signs of regret, no indication that they are still in the avoidant's thoughts. They conclude that the relationship must not have mattered very much, that their love was one-sided. This belief hurts deeply because it makes all their own emotions feel one-sided, because it invalidates everything they felt. At the very same time, the avoidant may assume the empath will eventually calm down, that their emotions will subside with time. They believe strong emotions naturally fade if enough space is given, if they are left alone. They expect time to solve what conversation could not, to heal the wounds that words could not reach. They rarely realize that unanswered questions often keep the empath emotionally attached much longer, that uncertainty is a powerful bond. Both assumptions are inaccurate. Both are rooted in misunderstanding. The empath mistakes delayed emotion for the absence of emotion, assumes the silence means they do not care. The avoidant mistakes visible emotion for temporary emotional intensity, assumes the pain will pass quickly. Neither understands what is actually happening inside the other person. Neither sees the hidden journey. As the silence continues, these mistaken beliefs become stronger, more entrenched, creating even greater emotional distance between two people who may still care far more than either one realizes, who may still be connected by invisible threads. As the weeks slowly turn into months, silence begins changing both people in ways that are almost invisible at first, ways that are only apparent over time. This is the stage where many assumptions fall apart, because the emotional experience is no longer controlled by the first reaction, because the initial shock has faded. The early shock has faded, its intensity dimmed. The immediate relief has also faded, its comfort worn away. What remains is something much deeper, something that cannot be ignored. Time starts revealing what each person was carrying beneath the surface all along, the weight they had been concealing. For the empath, this period often marks the beginning of a quiet transformation, a change that is both subtle and profound. During the first weeks, they may have believed they could never stop thinking about the relationship, that the memory would always haunt them. Every memory seemed powerful, every recollection vivid and painful. Every unanswered question felt impossible to ignore, demanding attention. But the human mind cannot remain in a constant state of emotional intensity forever, cannot sustain that level of pain indefinitely. Little by little, attachment begins to loosen, its grip weakening. It does not happen overnight, not in a single moment. It happens through hundreds of small moments, each one a tiny release. One morning, they wake up and realize they did not think about the relationship until lunchtime. A small victory. A few days later, they laugh without feeling guilty, their joy untainted. They enjoy a conversation without comparing it to the past, without measuring it against what was. They notice that certain places no longer carry the same emotional weight, that the pain has faded. These small changes seem insignificant on their own, barely noticeable. Yet, together, they create a profound shift, a transformation that changes everything. The emotional dependence that once felt impossible to escape slowly begins fading, its hold loosening. This change is often misunderstood because it is rarely dramatic, rarely accompanied by fanfare. There is no single day when the empath suddenly decides they no longer care, no moment of revelation. Instead, caring slowly changes its shape, becoming something different. The desperate need for answers becomes less urgent, the questions losing their power. The constant hope for a message loses its grip, its pull weakening. Their attention starts returning to parts of life that had quietly disappeared during the relationship, parts that were neglected. Old hobbies become interesting again, their appeal returning. Friendships grow stronger, the connections deepening. Personal goals that had been ignored begin receiving attention, their importance recognized. Their identity, which may have become deeply connected to the relationship, slowly starts standing on its own again, finding its own strength. This is one of the healthiest outcomes of genuine no contact, a gift that the silence offers. The empath begins remembering that they are more than someone's partner, more than someone's emotional support, and more than someone's source of reassurance. They become an individual again, a whole person. Peace slowly replaces longing, a calm that was once impossible to imagine. The relationship may still matter, its memory still present. The memories may still exist, their traces still felt. But those memories stop controlling every emotional decision, stop dictating their life. Instead of waking up hoping the other person returns, they begin waking up thinking about their own future, their own dreams. That quiet shift often surprises them because healing rarely feels exciting while it is happening, rarely announces itself. It simply feels lighter, freer. Meanwhile, the avoidant often begins entering the emotional stage that the empath experienced much earlier, the pain that was delayed. At first, distance felt comfortable because it removed emotional pressure, because it provided relief. But pressure and attachment are not the same thing, not interchangeable. Removing pressure does not remove love, memories, or emotional investment, does not erase what was. Those deeper feelings were simply buried beneath the stress of the relationship, hidden under layers of tension. Once enough time passes, the distractions become less effective, their power waning. Work is no longer enough to keep the mind occupied every evening, to fill the void. Daily routines become predictable again, their novelty gone. The nervous system has already calmed down, leaving room for emotions that were previously pushed aside, that were waiting to be felt. This is when unexpected loneliness often appears. A visitor that arrives without warning. It may arrive quietly during an ordinary moment while driving home, eating dinner alone, or seeing a place connected to shared memories, a place that triggers a flood of feeling. Nothing dramatic has happened, no event has triggered it. Yet suddenly the absence feels real, tangible, present. The relationship is no longer a source of pressure because it is no longer present, because it has become memory. Without that pressure, the emotional walls that once felt necessary begin lowering on their own, their defenses relaxing. This is an important psychological difference that many people misunderstand, a distinction that shapes everything. Silence does not manipulate the avoidant into caring, does not force them to feel. Silence simply removes the emotional intensity they were trying to escape, the weight that was pressing on them. During the relationship, constant conflict or emotional demands may have made it difficult for them to recognize their deeper feelings, may have obscured their truth. Their focus stayed on reducing stress instead of understanding attachment, on managing the present. Once that stress disappears, the attachment finally has room to become visible, to emerge from the shadows. They begin remembering positive experiences instead of only difficult conversations, instead of only the pain. Nostalgia becomes stronger than frustration, the good memories outshining the bad. Regret may slowly appear, a quiet ache that grows with time. They wonder whether problems could have been handled differently, whether they made mistakes. They remember laughter instead of arguments, the joy that was once shared. They remember comfort instead of pressure, the peace of being together. They may even begin questioning whether they left too quickly or whether silence lasted longer than they expected, whether they made the right choice. Alongside these thoughts comes another feeling that often surprises them, a feeling they did not anticipate. Fear, not fear of closeness this time, but fear that the other person may never come back, that the door has closed for good. The possibility of permanent loss becomes real, tangible, present. Earlier distance felt temporary, a break that could be repaired. Now it begins feeling permanent, final. This delayed emotional process often confuses both people, leaving them uncertain. The empath may already be finding peace, while the avoidant is only beginning to understand what the relationship truly meant, what they have lost. Their emotional timelines continue moving in different directions, never quite aligning. One has spent months processing pain, working through it. The other is only beginning to open the emotional box that was sealed shut at the beginning, that was kept closed. This difference explains why avoidants sometimes reach out long after everyone else believes the relationship is over, long after hope has faded. It is not always because they suddenly changed overnight, because they had an epiphany. It is often because their emotional awareness arrived much later than expected, because their grief was delayed. By the time they fully understand their feelings, the empath may already be standing in a completely different emotional place, a place that is no longer waiting. This brings us to one of the biggest misunderstandings about no contact, a misconception that causes so much confusion. Many people believe it is simply a strategy designed to make someone return, a tool for reconciliation. Countless discussions reduce it to a game of waiting, hoping the silence will create enough curiosity or loneliness to pull someone back into the relationship, to make them miss you. While silence can sometimes lead to reconnection, treating no contact as a manipulation completely misses its true psychological purpose, its deeper meaning. Healthy no contact is not about controlling another person's emotions, not about manipulating their feelings. It is about creating enough distance for both individuals to regulate their own emotions, to find their own balance. There is a huge difference between those two goals, a distinction that shapes everything. Manipulation focuses on changing someone else, on controlling the outcome. Healing focuses on changing yourself, on becoming whole. When people use no contact only as a way to trigger guilt, fear, or regret, they remain emotionally dependent on the outcome, their peace tied to the other person's response. Every day becomes another test, another moment of waiting. Every hour without a message feels like failure, like a sign that the strategy is not working. Their emotional state continues depending on another person's decisions, on their choices. That is not freedom, not true healing. It is simply another form of emotional attachment, another way of being controlled. Genuine no contact looks very different, feels different. It creates space for reflection, for seeing clearly. It allows emotions to settle naturally, to find their proper place. It gives both people the opportunity to see the relationship without the constant pressure of daily conflict, to see it as it truly was. Sometimes this leads to greater understanding, to clarity that was previously impossible. Sometimes it reveals incompatibilities that were impossible to recognize before, truths that were hidden. Sometimes it teaches both people lessons they could never have learned while staying locked inside the same unhealthy cycle, lessons that transform them. Growth does not guarantee reconciliation, and reconciliation is not the only successful outcome, not the only measure of healing. Many people assume that if two people never return to each other, then no contact failed, that the silence was wasted. In reality, two people can walk away forever and still experience tremendous healing because of the distance they shared, because of the growth it enabled. The empath may finally develop stronger boundaries, learning to protect themselves. They learn that loving someone should never require abandoning themselves, that self-love is not selfish. They become more selective about relationships that offer mutual respect instead of constant emotional exhaustion, choosing wisely. The avoidant may discover that avoiding difficult emotions does not actually remove them, that they must be faced. They begin recognizing the importance of communication, vulnerability, and emotional responsibility of being present. Even if these lessons are carried into completely different relationships, into new connections, the silence still served a meaningful purpose, still had value. Both people changed, transformed by the experience. Both people became more emotionally aware, more conscious. Healing is not measured only by whether two people reunite, whether they find their way back. It is measured by whether unhealthy patterns lose their power, whether the old cycles are broken. Of course, there are times when life brings both people back together after a long period apart, when the silence is broken. This moment often carries enormous emotional expectations, hopes that have been building for months. But what happens next depends far less on how much they missed each other, and far more on how much they changed while they were apart, on the growth they achieved. If neither person has grown, the reunion usually feels familiar in the worst possible way, a return to the old patterns. The excitement of seeing each other again briefly hides the old problems, conceals them for a moment. But familiar habits return quickly, the old dynamics reasserting themselves. The empath starts seeking reassurance in the same ways, needing validation. The avoidant begins feeling pressured by the same emotional patterns, feeling trapped. The relationship slips back into the cycle that caused the separation in the first place because nothing inside either person has truly changed, because they are still the same people. Sometimes only one person experiences meaningful growth, a transformation that is not shared. This creates a different challenge, a new imbalance. The relationship begins feeling emotionally uneven, the growth unequal. One person communicates openly while the other continues shutting down, hiding. One respects boundaries while the other repeats old reactions, falling into old habits. The person who has grown often notices the imbalance much faster than before because their standards have changed, because they see clearly. They are no longer willing to sacrifice their emotional health simply to keep the relationship alive, to hold on to the connection. Love alone is no longer enough, not sufficient. Emotional maturity becomes just as important, a necessary foundation. The healthiest possibility appears when both people have genuinely changed during their time apart, when both have grown. Conversations become calmer because neither person is speaking only from fear, because they are grounded. Boundaries become easier to respect because both understand their purpose instead of seeing them as rejection, because they have learned. Disagreements no longer feel like threats that must be escaped or solved immediately, but opportunities for understanding. Emotional safety slowly replaces emotional chasing, a new foundation. The empath no longer feels responsible for carrying the entire emotional weight of the relationship, for holding it all together. The avoidant no longer feels that every difficult conversation is a trap they must escape, a battle to be won. Missing each other may have opened the door, but lasting reconciliation depends on becoming emotionally different people than the ones who first walked away, on being transformed. Silence has a way of fooling us, of deceiving us. From the outside, it can look empty, cold, and meaningless, a void where something once was. But throughout this journey, we have seen that silence is often one of the loudest psychological experiences a person can go through, one of the most powerful. It does not affect everyone in the same way, because people do not carry the same emotional patterns, because their histories are different. An avoidant and an empath may stop speaking on the very same day, yet their hearts and minds begin traveling in completely different directions, each on their own journey. The avoidant often experiences relief before they experience loss because distance removes the emotional pressure they were struggling with, because the weight is lifted. The empath often experiences pain before healing because connection has always been their way of feeling safe, because closeness is their refuge. As time passes, those paths slowly begin to change, to evolve. The empath gradually lets go, rebuilding their identity and finding peace within themselves, becoming whole. The avoidant, free from the pressure they once escaped, may finally begin feeling the emotions they had buried for so long, the feelings they had suppressed. Neither journey is simple, and neither follows the same clock. Neither adheres to the same timeline. That is why emotional timing is one of the most misunderstood parts of human relationships, a source of so much confusion. Just because someone does not show their feelings today does not mean they will not face them tomorrow, does not mean they are absent. And just because someone is deeply hurting today does not mean they will stay that way forever, does not mean they are broken. Perhaps the greatest lesson is that no contact does not create emotions that were never there, does not invent feelings. It simply removes the distractions that were hiding them, the noise that was obscuring them. It exposes attachment patterns, emotional fears, and the habits both people developed long before they met each other, the patterns they brought with them. For one person, silence becomes the space where they learn to stop chasing validation, to find worth within. For the other, it becomes the space where they learn that running from emotions never truly makes them disappear, that they must be faced. Whether these two people eventually find their way back to each other or continue walking separate paths, the real victory is not measured by reconciliation, not by being together. It is measured by growth, by the transformation that occurs. It is measured by becoming emotionally stronger, healthier, and more self-aware than before, by becoming whole. Because the healthiest relationships are not built by two people desperately trying to fill each other's emotional emptiness, by two halves trying to make a whole. They are built by two people who have learned how to stand on their own while choosing to walk together, who are whole before they come together. When an avoidant and an empath both choose silence, it may look like nothing is happening, like the relationship is over. But beneath that silence, two very different emotional journeys unfold, each one significant. One learns to stop chasing, to find peace in letting go. The other learns to stop running, to face what they have been avoiding. Whether they find each other again or continue on separate paths, the deepest transformation is not about the relationship, not about who comes back. It is about becoming someone who no longer depends on old patterns to feel safe, who is secure within themselves. Now, here is the question that very few people stop to consider, a question that lingers. If they meet again after both have truly healed, will they recognize each other, or will they realize they have become completely different people than the ones who first fell in love, strangers to each other? Sometimes the greatest reunion is not with another person at all, not with the one who was lost. Sometimes it is with the version of yourself that was waiting to be found all along, the self that was always there. If this video gave you a new perspective on avoidance, empaths, and the hidden psychology of no contact, take a moment to like this video so more people can discover it. Share it with someone who may be struggling to understand their own relationship or emotional journey, who needs clarity. And if you enjoy deep psychological insights and relationship truths that go beyond the surface, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next video. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one.